All right, Maddie, we are live.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to Radical Democracy. This is Maddie Cheers, and thank you so much for joining us on Strong Island Radio. Sorry, we had some technical difficulties getting started, but we're going to go a little long today so that we get everything in we'd like to share with you. So we are going to be also live on the TuneIn app. You're not going to be able to call in today, but hopefully I will have no technical difficulties seeing any check-ins, any text messages or anything from anybody. I should be okay with that, I hope, because you know how I am. Sometimes it works for me and sometimes it doesn't. But we are here today to talk about radical health care, caring for yourself and caring for community. So what inspired me to do this podcast today was a few things. One of the things that really inspired me to do this was the talk about how there is so much talk and so many people who are running for office talking about, oh, we're going to have free healthcare, free healthcare, free healthcare. There's no such thing as free healthcare. I partly think that the reason people love to campaign saying we're going to give you this for free or that for free is because it's very nice to look like the benevolent monarch who's going to give you all this stuff for free. Medicare, all of that, Medicare and all of our health care, Medicaid, all of this is paid for by your community, the community we call the United States. So in 1935, just a quick, very, very brief history of Medicare. 1935, our community of the United States decides that we need to help people save for retirement. So we set up what is, if you are employed by somebody, you always see that line, FICA, the Federal Insurance Contribution Act, which means that you and your employer will now contribute 2.9% of your salary to the Social Security Trust Fund. And it goes in there and has been going into this trust fund since 1935. So anyone who has worked, if you're working for yourself like I do, you're paying the whole 2.9%. So if anybody who has worked, anybody who's working for themselves since 1935 has been contributing into this trust fund. Now, in 1965, our community, the United States, decides that we also want to help people who are older, who might need hospitalization, so we establish Medicare. And Medicaid is for those people that are unemployed, that are disabled, so that is a different thing. But right now we're talking about this decision we made as a community. All of us taxpayers decided in 1935 and 1965 that we were going to be responsible for each other. We were going to help each other out. So it's much better to think about Medicare and Social Security, what you get when you can retire, as a gigantic savings account started in 1935. And when everybody hits 65, they can take out their Medicare. They can start getting what they've paid in, because what you get back is based on what you've paid in over the years you've been working. So then at 67, if you want full benefits from your Social Security, your retirement fund, you can then get the full amount, and then there's a bonus amount if you do it at 70, so Social Security. But the idea is that this is a savings account established in 1935 for everybody in the country that's worked, so that we are taking care of each other. We need to think about ourselves as that community. So it's very disingenuous for candidates to say that they are giving you free health care. Nothing is free. It's not free. It's something that all of the working people with Social Security numbers have agreed to contribute to each other. That is what we have done. I'm going to let you know right now I'm having trouble seeing comments. I'm not exactly sure why. I'm sure it's me, user error. But I'm going to try and see if I can fix it when I hand it over to Jen. So to that end, to that idea of community, and that idea that I think if we can get back to this idea of understanding that somebody is not, there was a video that went around a few years ago, and it went around in a mean, nasty way because it was a video of a woman who had called into C-SPAN, and she was talking about how the president paid her rent. And it went viral, but it wasn't very nice. It didn't go viral for a good reason. And to me, it made me sad because I do think there are people out there, because of the way the two parties have campaigned for the last so many years, that actually do think that, like, whether or not their rent is being paid or their health care is being paid, that somehow it's being paid by those people in the government. Those people in the government only represent us, and the only money they have to work with is our money. And so we are agreeing, we have agreed to help each other through paying taxes, through Medicare, through retirement, through many, many things. So it's our consciousness, I think, again, as we talked about last week, needs to be changed. So I've invited my very, very special, wonderful friend, Rev Jen, since I'm out here in beautiful, wonderful, gorgeous Southern California, to join us today. And I'm going to turn it over to her, see if I can get you guys up on texting. And she's going to tell you a little bit about herself and why she's the wonderful human she is. So here she is.
Oh, I am the wonderful human I am. Well, thanks, Maddie. I feel really grateful that you're here in my home, and we can call in from sunny San Diego. And I just want to share that it's just really important that we can step back a little and open up and shift our perspective. And I think it was a really wonderful, it's good. Yeah. I think it's a really wonderful intro that you gave about understanding that really we are the ones responsible for any community government granted healthcare. And when we see it in that way, then it gives us a greater sense of power, right? That we have the power to help each other out. And what we were talking about, Maddie and I were talking a little yesterday about what we could share on this podcast. And she wanted me to talk a little bit about, what actually is free, right? What is free? That we have access to a lot of healing capacity, right? We're talking about healthcare, and a lot of times when we think of healthcare, we think of, your primary doctor, you go to the hospital for a surgery, you need pharmaceuticals, right? All of this costs money. What can we do? What can we be responsible for that we have access to, right? So, I was sharing with Maddie, I have this, vision of the breathing body. It's an institute or it's a spiritual community or a church, but it just has this consciousness around what are the different medicines that we can call on a daily basis for ourselves that can be healing.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, is that?
Yeah, I'm just trying to.
Oh, great. We got.
Sorry, a few technical difficulties. Keep going. Jen.
Feedback. Carry on. So what are the things that we can do? What are the things that we can do to contribute to our own health and our own well-being that is free and accessible to us, right? And some really basic things are breath. We can cultivate our own practice of relaxation and regeneration. I have a background as a yoga teacher. I've got 3 different yoga certifications, and I've taught Pilates for 18 years, and I'm a massage therapist in 3 different states. So I have a somatic background, in movement, in dance, in the healing arts, in touch. And there's so much power in keeping ourselves healthy. Like, what can we do to take responsibility to really keep ourselves in a state of health and well-being? And if we can do that, that's going to lighten the load on everybody, right? What we have to contribute to fixing our health later on, right?
Right.
So that's a direction that we wanted to go in how we want to talk today. Yeah.
And this is going to be really important because, everybody's talking about cutting health care and cutting Social Security and cutting all of these things. But if we think about it, like Jen said, if we start thinking about it, this is our responsibility to each other. So if we're going to have to cut health care costs, the best way to cut our health care costs, rather than taking away from what's already there for all of us, would be for all of us to take responsibility for ourselves and become healthier. And that's the wonderful thing about going back to, as we always do here on this show, going back to American Indian teachings, indigenous teachings all over the world. So when we go back and we look at these things, then we see that there are ways that we can take care of ourselves. So we know, like I've said this before on the show, there is an $11 billion a year legal antidepressant business in this country. A lot of that is being paid for by our taxes, which is ridiculous because there are lots of studies, one of which came out of Harvard, that shows that depression in most people is much better dealt with a social community, with some kind of exercise program, with yoga, with breathing, with Tai Chi, that all of these things, especially that have to do with, as Jen just mentioned, deep breathing, have much more effect on depression than the pills that you're getting, because the pills that you're getting are pills that are designed to affect organic depression, which only 14% of the people have. So this study by Harvard comes out, nothing happens. Of course, nothing happens, because why? It's connected to big pharma and politics and all of that. But if the government is not going to take responsibility for us, then we have to take back our power. We are going to have to look at these many ways we have in which we can help each other, practice with each other. And maybe we have to demand, as we're changing healthcare laws, maybe we have to demand that what's now called alternative healthcare, nutrition, relaxation, thank you, Celia, exercise, meditation, leisure time, that all of these things also be included in our health care. And maybe we have to talk about, when we're providing food for people, that I know that allegedly there are some restrictions on what people can get on SSI, but I don't know that they're enough. I've seen people in stores buying things on SSI you or I probably wouldn't buy. And maybe it's a matter of money for educating people who have to be on these supplemental incomes that we are all contributing to. I like that word contributing much better than I like the word taxed for, because these are agreements we've made. And I really feel like between us, the population of the United States, when we're sitting down talking to each other like this, when we're not just listening to our politicians, then we can come up with the answers. And then we can tell the politicians, this is the direction we want you to go in. So I'm going to turn it back to Jen. She has the concept that she was talking about, you call universal medicines, right? These universal medicines, some of which Celia just came in. Thanks, Celia. Sorry you can't call in today. But these universal medicines are things that we might require more education. Maybe we want to see people like Jen and Celia and me funded to go out and teach people who need to learn about this. I mean, there's a lot of options that will bring us closer together as far as healthcare, but not tear us apart. I think if we all see that we are responsible to each other by being responsible for ourselves, that makes life a lot happier for everybody. So I'm going to turn it back to Jen.
Yeah, so I was asking myself the question, what is it that really connects us? Because in this day and age, there's a lot of, defining what defines me, what defines you, how are we different, how can we argue, how can we, there's a lot of, I feel like that's getting in the way, right, of finding solutions. So if we go a little bit deeper and find, well, what are the fundamentals that really connect all of us as human beings, right? And how can we see each other as the same? And when we do that, we can shift our consciousness around all of this, right? So basic thing is breathing. And if you go across different cultures, different spiritual traditions, different religions all over the place, it's a basic human element that keeps us all alive. We all breathe, right? So nobody's excluded from that. So breath is fundamental. It's a basic component of many different meditation techniques, right, across many different traditions. And it's a way that we can connect to ourselves. It's a way that we can find what is true and healing for us. And it's a way that we can physically, emotionally, and mentally heal, right? When we're in a state of anger, we can meditate and breathe. We can calm ourselves down. If we have a physical ailment, we physically breathe. As a massage therapist, I work with people with all kinds of physical issues. I mean, across the board, most Americans, neck and shoulder tension from driving, from computers, from stress, and just getting people breathing. I've spent time, both Maddie and I have spent time with Dr. Lewis Malmadrona, who's keeping alive the traditions, the traditional North American bodywork traditions from the Cherokee and Shawnee and Pawnee people. That I tell people that what I find really fundamental in that tradition of this land that we live on is really the breath is fundamental, because breath is spirit, and breath is what enlivens us, right? The more we breathe, the more alive we are. If we have pain, we're not breathing. So when people come in with an injury or with pain, there's not breath moving in that place. So when people are looking to move past an injury or past an emotional trauma or through something, you want to move from a restriction of, there's no movement, there's no breath, to a place where there's freedom, where there is breath. And then when there is breath, then energy can move, and then the body innately can heal itself. So I think there's a fundamental shift in understanding that we have inside of ourselves, whether you are a spiritual or religious person, you believe there's a divine force greater than you that can heal you, or that's not your belief, but you believe that there's an internal capacity inside for self-healing. You can see that as an internal thing or an external thing, but there is a force, a healing force, that innately brings us back into balance, right? When we need it a little bit halfway, right? When we decide we want to put in a little effort and we want to consciously breathe, we want to get a massage, we want to go to an acupuncturist, we're going to put out some energy to help ourselves,
Right.
Then our bodies can really do a lot of the healing themselves. That's why the placebo effect is so effective when you have, I was going to be a psychologist in college, so I took a ton of psych courses. And I remember being blown away by all of these studies I would read, the double-blind studies where the placebo was just as effective as the drug. And it's because people put the energy into getting that medicine, so they wanted to heal. They took the medicine believing that it was healing them, right? And it worked. So, there's a power in wanting healing, and wanting balance, and then, taking some action. And there's an innate healing capacity that we have, so that when we slow down and we take the time to breathe, whether that's through Tai Chi or yoga or, meditation, whatever the practice is, when we take that time for ourselves, we can bring ourselves back into balance, especially if we do it on a daily, weekly balance. We have a rhythm where we're committing to our own healing. We can make a lot of shifts that way.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly. So Celia also just texted in, take a few minutes to breathe, and it will help you in stress situations. So that's the thing that we're talking about, that once you can, and stress can be connected to all kinds of illnesses. Once you realize that you have that power through breathing, through simple walking, I remember years ago when the Aerobics Institute did all their studies with jogging and running and aerobic dance and all this kind of stuff. And the guy that headed up the institute at the time, and I am talking years ago, said, yeah, well, if you just walk for 2 miles every day, that's the place to start. So it's what's great about what we call alternative healthcare, which I prefer to call regular old healthcare. I don't know if I come up with a name for that, but this wisdom healthcare, this wisdom of the ages healthcare, things that have been. It's not like they haven't been studied. They've had thousands and thousands of years of study. We recognize massage as being helpful to somebody's health. We recognize that breathing can calm you down. And Melissa, thank you, Melissa. Hi, Melissa. Melissa just texted in. I got off diabetic meds 4 years ago, 4 pills a day, pills a day, when I added yoga to my life. So this is what happens with diabetes all the time. Diabetes can be cured. Most of the people that have the kind of diabetes we're thinking about, not the juvenile, not that there is some, you do need some tweaking there with medicine, but most diabetic people, I believe it's the type B, it's the things we see in indigenous populations because they made the shift to poor nutrition from great nutrition in such an overnight situation. So where you see diabetes a lot of that can be fixed with nutritional changes, and like Melissa just pointed out, with yoga. She would like to call this common sense healthcare. I love that title, Melissa. We're going to call it that, common sense healthcare. So thank you. But that's what we're talking about. But the consciousness raising part is for people to look at taking common sense healthcare and using it in connection and with a responsibility to the rest of the community. It is my responsibility to remain as healthy as I can. What if we do end up with a healthcare system like England where they give you an expiration date? I was just reading about this. So your life expectancy if you're a woman is 80 years. If something happens to you after 80 years old, you're like last on the list for getting any kind of medicine or getting any kind of surgical benefits or getting, that's, you better start taking care of yourself now. Start walking, start yoga, start something, because if we end up with that style of universal health care, we all need to start thinking about taking care of ourselves. But I think it's a much more pleasant way to think about that we're taking care of ourselves so that we can be of help to the people in our family, then the people in our immediate community, then our country, then the world. That really is the idea, is that we return to a consciousness of community. So to that end, I'm going to tell this really quick joke. So a few years ago, Bob and I heard, Bob is my husband. He's been on the show before. For those of you that are new, he's a cultural anthropologist. So we were taking a course at the University of New Mexico called Traditional Medicine Without Borders, which is all about teaching the types of things that we're talking about now. And there was a gentleman there, a doctor from Uganda there. And they, like most Native American people, are big believers in the idea of healing in community. We've talked about women's circles on this show. That all comes from Native American tradition, at least the ones that we do. There are circles that have been done from Chinese tradition. In these older traditions of medicine, there's always this community idea of teaching and of healing. So he tells a story about a guy who lived in a village. So this guy lives in a village, and everybody knows he's insane because he thinks that he is corn. So every time he sees a chicken, he runs away because he's afraid that he's going to get eaten by the chicken. So finally, the people say, "Oh, we got to help him. We have to send him off to the local mental institution and see if they can fix him." So they send him off to the local mental institution. He's gone from the community for a couple of months. He comes back. He's better. They ask him, "So, do you know you're not corn?" "Yes, I know I'm not corn. See, if I pinch myself, I'm a person. I can feel it. I can laugh. I'm a person. Yes, I know I am a human being. I am not corn." And so sure enough, a chicken comes down the road and he starts to run away. And the people run after him. Why are you running? He goes, well, I know I'm not corn. You know I'm not corn, but I'm not so sure the chicken knows I'm not corn. So I'm leaving. So he told that story to show that if we heal in community, and yes, laughter is the best medicine, but he told the story so that we would understand the take that Dr. Mel Madrona also has, and I'm going to give it back to Jen in a minute to speak to that your community also has to know you're healed. Your community should be there with you to support you and not expect you to be the person you were before you went through the process of healing. And the best way to do that is to have them there with you. So that's one of the reasons for the circles. I remember Dr. Mel Madrona telling a story about how he includes all these people from the community when he's healing somebody, and some of these people that come up with the most information for the person being healed is like your local garbage man, because he sees everything that's in your trash can. So he knows what's going on with you, what you're eating, what your nutrition is or is not. So this whole idea of community extends beyond just the consciousness we need to have of actually seeing each other face to face. We need that we can do locally, but the consciousness of that being shared throughout the country and hopefully ultimately throughout the world. So I'm going to give it back to Jen to talk about some of Dr. Mel Madrona's teachings and her practices.
Yeah, when you were just sharing that, what came to mind, you mentioned face to face. And I think one of the we have beautiful advances in technology right now, of course, and everybody's also coming to a place, I think, with most of the people that I'm in contact with anyways are coming to a place with social media and their telephones and saying, gosh, I've got to now figure out a way to dial back a little bit, because now I'm on all these social media sites too much, or I'm on my screen too much, and I'm aware of that, right? So now there are apps to help us. Okay, well, how much screen time did I actually have, and how can I dial that back a little bit? And I think one of the things, I have a son who's 4, and I taught at a teen camp for about 7 years every summer with teenagers. Now this was back long enough ago that, let's see, what were the years? 2006, 7, right? But all the kids had cell phones at that point. And it was like torture to have to give up their cell phones to go to this summer camp, for 2 weeks or 4 weeks. But their feedback was they had so much connection and so much learning and so much healing. And the reason why the camp was so transformational for them was because they had to connect with people face to face the whole time, eating meals together, taking these classes together. It was all interactive, right? It wasn't by text or by, through a technology medium. And I think that that's one piece of healing that we can really ask ourselves, what can we do for this next generation of kids that are growing up? How can we facilitate more face-to-face connection? And what are the common sense medicines that we have available to us that we can offer to our children and teach them as a habit that they can do for themselves, so that they're not completely sucked into technological connection. I don't want to say it's a be all end all, but that's, yes. It's like I think it's a real serious question that we have to pose,
Yes, because ultimately this what we're talking about with caring for ourselves and caring for the community, ultimately we're doing this also for, as we say over and over again, the next 7 generations. We're doing this for our children. We all have children in one way or another who are talking today. Melissa, Celia, we're grandparents, grand aunts, we're parents, we're the children of our community are our future as human beings. So it always rankles me when I hear people say, well, why should I have to pay the taxes for that kid's education or that kid's health care? That they're our future. We are humans. and we would like to see the human race continue. Kind of the plan, right? So they are also healing for us. I mean, I highly recommend, there's all these programs now where they bring young kids in to see old people who are in nursing homes. And the little kids love it. They may have grandparents, they may not, but now they do. And of course, the old people love it because now they have grandchildren. And it's been a remarkable experiment, and it's worked. The places that can get it going, that's something you could do for your community. You could think about, well, does my community have this grandparent-grandchild program? Because the most forgotten people in our country are the old people in nursing homes. And I'm telling you, if you ever want to convince yourself to be healthy, go visit a nursing home. If you ever want to convince yourself to take responsibility for yourself, go visit a nursing home. And like Celia said, each generation learns from the previous generations. I don't have children, but I have a big family. I've mentioned this before. Nothing gives me greater joy than all the little ones that, have been my nieces and nephews and now grandnieces and grandnephews. And it gives me perspective. The Haudenosaunee would not let a person become a leader unless they had children, especially men. They said, no, men cannot become leaders until they have children. Because their feeling was back then that men didn't know how to be unselfish until they had a child, that they really needed to see the future that they were preparing in their own children. And so that is very important. But also, the most important people in their community were the old people, were the elders. They were the ones who got the most respect. Other than the elders, everybody else's job was equal. Even the people that were the leaders. I think I mentioned once before how they ate last during ceremony. They still do. The leaders go to the end of the line. Your people eat first. And we, the people, have to flip that in our heads. That's what we have to start demanding of our leaders. And we have all this wisdom out here from people like just from Jen and Melissa and Celia. We have all this wisdom about the where we've been, and there needs to be more connection and honoring generationally. I think that bye, Melissa. Talk to you soon. So I think that generationally, this is another thing we can start facilitating, not just the little kids going to see the elders, but then I have a friend of ours, Marianne's daughter, who's going to be doing a show next week. So Marianne Francisi, her daughter Mary was in a big project with teens going to talk to the elders, and they found it fascinating. These are people who have lived through World War II, in some cases World War I. These are people who worked on, the moon landing, who did things that they're just reading about in history books. And when you're sitting with somebody but they're telling you from their personal experience, that history comes alive. And that living history is the value of our elders. And instead, we're drugging them and putting them in nursing homes. And that's something we need to question as we go forward in looking at how we're going to develop health care that is just and fair to all Americans. Because that's what we're really talking about here is what we would call a fairness doctrine if you're not of a spiritual bend, what in those of us in spiritual practices refer to as sacred reciprocity. That everything is connected, that idea that we are connected to each other. So I also want to just say that we do have to look at how important mindset is to a healthy living. Thank you, Celia. What is that person's mindset? And here's where I really agree with the whole breathing concept, is just that, how my mom used to tell me to count to 10 when you were angry. Breathe to 10, really, those deep breaths. So I'm going to turn it back to Jen. Sorry, we're kind of sharing a phone here, guys, back and forth.
Yeah, so I think it's a really good conversation if we can just start the conversation and keep the conversation going. How can we, for ourselves personally, because we can talk about greater government and running for office and changing the government, and that's great. But there's that understanding. There's a quote from the Dalai Lama, right? If you have and I don't have the quote in front of me, but it's about if you have peace and love in the family, right?
Right.
Then you have that in the community, and then that community goes out farther and farther and farther, right? You have to start with your nuclear. You have to start with your small unit and work outward, right?
Absolutely.
So the question, instead of spending a lot of time arguing and being in our mind about what are all the problems with the ginormous system, right? How to step back from talking about government a little bit and then let's have conversations, right, about how we can, how we can shift the mindset and how we can do things that are healing. What does sacred reciprocity mean for me and the members of my family or the members of my household, right? And how can I bring medicines to myself? How can I bring them to the people around me? And then look for local solutions. Like you were saying, well, there's a nursing home right down the street. What can I do? Can I bring my kids there? So I just want to brainstorm a little bit, and I don't know how many people are texting in, but what are medicines that are universal and that are free, right? And that we can access for ourselves and our family. And, for me, what I've come up with is, in my experience, in my practice, right, as a somatic practitioner, breath, right? Breath is medicine. It's universally accessible, right, in any moment for ourselves. Movement is medicine. So are we getting movement in our bodies, like physical movement, right? Walking, yoga, tai chi, it doesn't matter what kind of movement, but physical movement. Touch, I believe, is medicine, right? Kind touch. So, whether that's a hug from your family member, just basic human touch, people are not getting enough of, in my humble opinion. And what I would see when I worked with the teenagers is we have in our society a very puritanical, no touch policy, with children. There are schools. I have friends that are teachers. Now there's policy. Okay, you can't hug your children in your classroom. No touching your friends, no hugging your friends. We've kind of gone off of the deep end there. As far as that policy. And then in our culture, we have a culture that is just filled with over-sexualized, images and input and media. I was just sharing with MADDI the other day that there's a study that someone shared with me. They were trying to get going a study, and I don't remember the details, but it was a study with 12-year-old boys. And it was a pornography study. They were going to study the effect of pornography on 12-year-old boys, and they couldn't find a single 12-year-old boy that had not yet seen pornography to have the other group. So it's like these are the messages our kids are getting. Like, no, touch is terrible, and then here you go, have some porn. But what in our culture is teaching healing, kind touch? Where are we doing that? Where are we showing that as an example, in our storytelling, in our movies, in our example?
Yep.
So, in teen camp, one of the things that we would do, we had massage classes. We taught Thai massage at teen camp, and we created a culture of kids giving each other shoulder rubs, and learning some basic, and it was just so fantastic because everybody needs touch, and you go into these young teenage years and all of a sudden touch is taboo. And, and then we have these kids that feel so disconnected, and we have this ridiculous suicide rate that's happening with our children. Children, 6-year-olds, as young as 6-year-olds, children are killing themselves, because they feel disconnected. So what can we do to get back to have our children feel connected, and as adults feel connected.
Exactly.
And I think touch is a real basic human need that we need to have happening in ways that are safe and reciprocal and kind.
Right.
Right. So as a massage therapist, that's a stance that I feel pretty powerful. Pretty strongly about, I should say.
That is one of the most powerful things I think we're talking about here today. I don't know how many of you remember, and I do, years ago when they found these children, I believe it was in Russia, but they were just warehoused, that had been warehoused basically since they were babies, and they went insane. Because nobody held them, nobody touched them, they rocked, there was nothing really physically wrong with them to start with. But without the human touch, they were fed, people looked in on them, but they just went, they literally, some of them died because there was no touch, but none of them developed normally. And really, at the end of the study, the people that went in and looked at this, it was because there was no loving touch involved there, no parenting, nothing that could make you feel connected. And I remember we had a pediatrician in our group once, and I was teaching about the cradle board, how the babies were raised in the cradle boards, which allow the baby to be raised standing up, and it's snuggled, and it's always with people, and, if it needs to be changed, it's right there with mommy, and mommy can work while the baby's there. But the pediatrician that was in the class wants to bring it back because doctors know, and I actually had a second pediatrician just a couple of weeks ago who thinks we should bring it back because these young women doctors that were in the class said this first year of your life is so important. That touch, that knowing you're safe, that being around people who look at you in a loving way, and that if we can establish that in the first year and then continue it, that's where you see these kids that are so self-confident, they're precocious, you look at them and they're going to be what we define as a leader, but there are all kinds of leaders. And if you have that loving kindness from the time you are young, then you're going to develop that as a human being. You're going to be able to give it to others. And this idea of, like Celia just pointed out, we can start listening to our kids eye to eye and turn off distractions like the phone. And then we as the adult are relating to our children. That statistic just came out, this was maybe a few months ago. 64% of teenagers would rather text their friends than sit and talk to them. That is something they are modeling from home. That is not just the way it is in teenage world, because I know, and from being with teenagers, especially in the work that you did, Jen, that when you start modeling something else for them, we all love it. They love that. When we're in schools and we're with these kids talking to them in conversation, face to face with them all day, they end the day with, I wish I could be a Native American, even though for Native Americans today it's not quite that way. But what they're saying is, I wish we could sit here in community all the time and talk with each other and tell stories and look at interesting things and learn in that way. So humans need love. Thank you for reminding us, Seal.
Basic.
But the big problem, like Celia points out, especially with children that are committing suicide, is that they don't feel like they belong anywhere. And all humans need to feel like they belong. It's also the reason that kids who really don't want to be in gangs in these poor communities end up in gangs, because there's a place to belong. They're missing that in other arenas. Actually, President Obama just gave a great speech a couple of days ago. I'm not going to pull it up. I didn't get a chance to break it down, about how young men in these poor communities need to step up to the plate. They need to stop acting like gang members and start acting like fathers. If the kid doesn't have a father, be the father. And don't just be the father like you're going to have 22 kids, and that's like some kind of mark of being a man. Be the father that you should be, that you are. You might even be that father. So so the idea of this type of responsibility of going back to some of these, like Melissa said, common sense healthcare situations, and ideas and practices are vitally important now. This is a very frightening time for our young people, as we can see in the rates of suicide and the rates of drug addiction climbing and climbing and climbing. And we as grown-ups have a responsibility to them, we as the community members, and starting in your own home community and starting, like Jen said, in those areas. That you can do. It is hard to think about the chunk of fixing healthcare for the entire United States. Don't worry about that right now. Fix it in your house. Take the steps that need to be taken right now. Jen, back to you.
Yeah. So yeah, I'm just thinking about the ways that I've made conscious decisions to listen inside and to do what feels healthy and healing for me, right? It might not be the mainstream thing that everybody does, but what choices have I made that I can say, oh, hey, what's going to be healing for me, and how can I practice that, right? So, and then I think we need to be able to make commitments to ourselves, like, hey, self, this is what I'm going to do for you, and I promise to do this for you every day, right? And we all have our distractions, and we all have our ways that we kind of go off the path and things don't work, and we make a promise and it doesn't happen, and okay, but then we just get back on. So, for me, and it will look different in different phases of my life, in different moments in time. But a meditation practice, it used to be, an hour-long practice. Now, it's 11 minutes, right? But just to break things down to the least common denominator, I feel like, is what I found really works, okay? Because I've done these yoga practices, really simple alternate nostril breathing, where it's something so powerful that I love to teach people because, it's an ancient yogic technique, but it works for everybody. You don't have to be a yogi. You don't have to study yoga. It's a universal human thing. We all have nostrils. But, you breathe in through the left nostril. You breathe out through the right. You breathe in through the right. You breathe out through the left. And you do this slow. It gives your mind something to focus on. And it's balancing the two hemispheres of the brain, if you just want to look at it physically, right? So you're balancing your brain. You're calming yourself down, you're focusing, and I start my day out that way so I can start from a place of balance and connection and calm. And then I weave in a little prayer practice to that. And that's my essential morning meditation. And maybe it gets longer, but that's something that I've promised myself. And that really plays a big role in me feeling calm and staying out of stress, as best I can in my day. So another thing that I'll promise myself is like, okay, go to the beach. I live 10 minutes from the beach. When I go to the beach and put my feet on the earth, in the sand and in the ocean, and watch the sunset, to see natural beauty, that's healing. Mm-hmm. To get fresh air and be in nature. You have a little path, a patch of woods, even outside your office, there's a tree. To go outside, when I used to live in New York City, there'd just be this chaotic energy. And if I could take my shoes off, I would go to Central Park, take my shoes off and sit behind a tree, and I could feel the chaos of the city just draining out of me. Mm-hmm. And when I lived in New York, it would just be committing to having one day a week where I didn't work, and I gave myself permission to just follow my own, what do I need today? Right. And often that would be go to Central Park and take your shoes off and sit by a tree. And that would be healing for me. So, it depends on who you are, what you need, but, finding the thing, like, what is the medicine that I need that I can get for free because it's nature, because it's my breath, because it's movement, and then what works for me, what brings me joy, and then I can commit to that. Right. Let me do that every day, or let me at least get that in once a week. Right. Let me go for that long walk in the woods once a week. Or let me take, if you have a dog, that's great, because then you're committed to going out for walks usually. But I feel like we can all ask ourselves that, find some guidance, some inner guidance, and then commit to that,
Yep.
and that's really the first step. And when we can find that for ourselves, then we're modeling that for our kids. We're modeling that every night. I say thank you with my son. We light a candle and we say thank you
Yes,
for
gratitude.
Gratitude is medicine, and that's free.
Yes.
That is free, and it changes. We're talking about raising consciousness and changing perspective. And when all we see is problems, X, Y, and Z, and this is not working, and that's not working, and this was we're stuck in this energy of all the things that are wrong. And if we can shift into, oh my gosh, what an amazing office I have. Look at that plant. I'm this far away from the beach. Just really focusing on everything that works, then that's really lifting us up into a really healthy consciousness and a really healthy state. And that affects our body.
Yes.
That affects all of us.
Yes.
So we can shift like that. So I think that's, it's all common sense. Nothing that we're saying is earth-shattering.
No,
but it's important.
it is important, and it's important that it's for you to know that you have the power to ask yourself that question. I know there are people out there with 2 and 3 jobs. I know that there are people out there that are really feeling afraid of what's going to happen next, that are living paycheck to paycheck. But if you can take the moment to say, well, but I do have a roof over my head. I do have friends.
Mm-hmm.
If you can list, even if for you it's only one thing you're grateful for, just that idea. And we know from science that the second you even hear somebody say thank you or express gratitude, your brain shifts. It releases serotonin in your brain. You don't even have to be the one saying thank you. So, and the same thing happens if you see an act of kindness, much less if you're the one doing the act of kindness. So things like we said, Celia just put up, go outside, get some fresh air, take a walk, put on some music and dance. I mean, I can't tell you, how many people we know who are not even close to being wealthy, who come to some of our spiritual circles and our ceremonies and everything, who, we'll be waiting around for a ceremony to start or something, and everybody's dancing around or they're playing in the yard. I mean, and these are people who have way less than the average American has. And yet, because their cultures are full of music and dance, and their cultures are full of game playing, they bring that to us. And that's another thing that's really fun and really enlightening. And I realize not everybody lives in a city or near a city like New York or San Diego or LA, but go do something from another culture. Go open your mind and your heart and just look at what people are doing differently. And I think, and also a spiritual practice. There is no question on the list of things that, and I realize not all of you out there believe in a God or the Creator, and that's fine. But we do know that a spiritual community is very, very helpful and makes people feel safe and happy and gives them a place to turn. And you could create your own. And if you're not of a mind to have a spiritual community, have an ethical community, have a group where you meet once a week, once a month, and you talk about, whatever you talk about, or you just share with each other, or you support each other. I mean, it's something you can discover in yourself. It's something you can discover in your friends. And I do think, Jen, the one thing you brought up that is extremely important is that getting out of the cycle of complaining about everything. The complaining makes us feel bad. And I think only if we do this, if we're caring for ourselves as a consciousness of caring for the community, then eventually you'll have the energy to go on the marches or run for office or do whatever it is you think can change the world. But you are being the change, changes the world. It really does, the energy of that. And thank you, Celia, again, start to notice what's right, especially with your kids' behavior. There's a lot right in the world. I'm a big believer in that. So is Jen. So are many, many spiritual people that I know, and non-spiritual people. Take notice. There's, I got a text from a friend of mine who is a spiritual leader, Grace, who she just She just texted a little while ago, not texted, posted on Facebook a little while ago. If you have a roof over your head and food in your mouth and friends, you should be grateful. I mean, it does come down to just that, and then go from there. So I think I'm going to give it to you, Jen, for a couple of closing words. So back to you.
Back to me. So I think that the closing, the theme of what you've been saying, Maddie, is really that we all can do this for ourselves, right? We can all do this for ourselves, and I think it's just taking a step back and saying, what is right? What can I be grateful for, right? And then what do I need, and what can be healing for me in my life, and how can I resource that myself? Obviously, we need health care. If you get into an accident and your arm gets severed off, thank God that we have surgeons that can sew it back on. You know what? Oh my God, we have amazing medicine, right? And Western medicine is so great, especially for those emergency situations. But so much of our medical system we don't need if we don't get sick. If we can keep ourselves healthy, we can really benefit the whole community by not needing a lot of sick care, right? We have our own health care, right? And we can really resource that ourselves, right? We can really resource that ourselves, and it's a conversation we can have with ourselves.
Yes,
right.
Absolutely,
and
excellent. Well, thank you all so much for listening. In 2 weeks, Celia and I will be live with more ideas about dealing with your children, their children, our children. We'll do a show on that. Next week will be Marianne Francisi here with more news on education, literacy, and all the topics that she's so wonderful at. And I just want to thank you all for listening in, and I hope we gave you some ideas that you can work with. Get a good night's sleep tonight. That's a good way. And I just want to really quick mention, Jen, if you're out here in the San Diego, Encinitas area, this is a wonderful thing you might want to do. Jen is having a fundraiser on Women's Day. I'm going to have her mention it real quick. We got like 1 minute, Jen.
Okay, so quick. Yeah, we're just going to share that speaking of community and connecting and helping each other out, on March 8th, 9th, and 10th, there's a fundraiser for iwillshinealight.org is the website, iwillshinealight.org. It's a not-for-profit organization that funds different organizations that rescue and rehabilitate women and children out of the human trafficking and sex slavery trade. So I feel really passionate about raising awareness and lifting consciousness around touch. So this is just a real natural fundraiser that I felt passionate about. So that's happening in 2 weeks here in San Diego, if you're interested.
So thank you all so much. We really appreciate your listening. Thank you, Celia. Thank you, Melissa, and anybody else who's out there that didn't text in. And have a peaceful night's sleep. Go have fun. Fun. That's a good free thing. Go have fun. Go nap. Have fun and nap. Take a nap and laugh. Thank you, guys. Bye-bye. Thank you, Bobby, my wonderful producer. Thank you, Mr. Lacera. Bye, you all.